Hello, this is Dan, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the March 1st, 2026 issue of the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And starting on the front cover, Supreme Leader Killed as U.S. and Israel Strike Iran by John Gambrell, Melanie Lidman, Josh Boak, and Eric Tucker, Dubai, United Arab Emirates. Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was killed in a major attack by Israel and the United States. Iranian state media confirmed early Sunday, throwing the future of the Islamic Republic into doubt and raising the risk of regional instability. U.S. President Donald Trump announced the death hours earlier, saying it gave Iranians their greatest chance to take back their country. State media reported that the 86-year-old was killed in an airstrike targeting his compound in downtown Tehran. Satellite photos from Airbus showed that the site was heavily bombed. His death at his office showed that he consistently stood among people at the forefront of his responsibilities, confronting what officials called global arrogance, state TV said. Khamenei, one of the most evil people in history, is dead, Trump wrote in a social media post. He warned of heavy and pinpoint bombing that he said would continue throughout the week and even beyond, part of a lethal assault the U.S. has justified as necessary, moving to the next page, to disable the country's nuclear capabilities. Iran, which responded to the strikes with its own counterassault, warned of retribution, with the cabinet saying that this great crime will never go unanswered. The paramilitary Revolutionary Guard threatened to launch its most intensive offensive operation ever. The attack opened a stunning new chapter in U.S. intervention in Iran, carrying the potential for retaliatory violence and a wider war, and represented a startling flex of military might for an American president who swept into office on an America First platform and vowed to keep out of, quote, forever wars. The killing of Khamenei in the second Trump administration assault on Iran in 8 months appeared certain to create a leadership vacuum given the absence of a known successor and because the 86-year-old supreme leader had final say on all major policies during his decades in power. He led Iran's clerical establishment and the Revolutionary Guard, the two main centers of power in the governing theocracy. As reports trickled out about the death, eyewitnesses in Tehran told the Associated Press that some residents were rejoicing, cheering from rooftops, blowing whistles, and letting out ululations. Citing unidentified sources, the semi-official Fars news agency, believed to be close to the Revolutionary Guard, reported that several relatives of Khamenei were also killed, including a daughter, son-in-law, daughter-in-law, and grandchildren, or a grandchild. The joint U.S.-Israel operation, which officials say was planned for months, took place Saturday during the Muslim holy fasting month of Ramadan and at the start of the Iranian work week. It followed stilted negotiations and warnings from Trump, who last year trumpeted his administration's success in incapacitating the country's nuclear program, but nonetheless cast the latest round as necessary to head off its potential resurgence. About 12 hours after the attacks began, the U.S. military reported no U.S. casualties and minimal damage at U.S. bases, despite, quote, hundreds of Iranian missile and drone attacks. It said targets in Iran included Revolutionary Guard command facilities, air defense systems, missile and drone launch sites, and military airfields. Israel, for its part, said it had killed the commander of the Revolutionary Guard Corps and the country's defense minister, as well as the secretary of the Iranian Security Council, a close advisor to Khamenei. Khamenei was unable to avoid our intelligence and highly sophisticated tracking systems, and working closely with Israel, there was not a thing he or the other leaders that have been killed along with him could do, Trump said. This is the single greatest chance for the Iranian people to take back their country. An Iranian diplomat told the United Nations Security Council that hundreds of civilians were killed and wounded in the strikes. Iran retaliated by firing missiles and drones toward Israel and at U.S. military bases in the region, and exchanges of fire continued into the night. Some of the first strikes in Iran appeared to hit near the offices of Khamenei, the second leader of the Islamic Republic who succeeded Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, the leader of the 1979 Islamic Revolution. Israel Israeli officials confirmed the death, followed by Trump. Democrats decried that Trump had taken action without congressional authorization. White House spokesperson Caroline Leavitt said the administration had briefed several Republican and Democratic leaders in Congress in advance. Tensions have soared in recent weeks as the Trump administration built up the largest force of American warships and aircraft in the Middle East in decades. The president insisted he wanted a deal to constrain Iran's nuclear program while the country struggled with growing dissent following nationwide protests. Though Trump had pronounced the Iranian nuclear program obliterated in strikes last year, the country was rebuilding infrastructure that it had lost, according to a senior U.S. official who spoke to reporters on condition of anonymity to discuss Trump's decision-making process. The official said intelligence showed that Iran had developed the capacity to produce its own high-quality centrifuges, an important step in developing the highly enriched uranium needed for weapons. Iran responded to the latest strikes by launching missiles and drones toward Israel and targeting U.S. military installations in Bahrain, Kuwait, and Qatar. The Israeli military said Iran fired dozens of missiles at Israel, with many intercepted. The Magen David Adom Rescue Service said Saturday night that a woman in the Tel Aviv area died after being wounded in an Iranian missile attack. At least 3 explosions were heard Saturday evening near the Intelligence Ministry building in northern Tehran, witnesses said, adding that air defense systems had begun operating there. Israel's military said it had begun new strikes against missile launchers and aerial defense systems in central Iran. In southern Iran, at least 115 people were reported killed when a girls' school was struck, and dozens more were wounded, the local governor told Iranian state TV. U.S. Central Command spokesperson Captain Tim Hawkins said he was aware of reports that a girls' school was struck and that officials were looking into them. Iran's state news agency IRNA said at least 15 people were killed in the southwest, quoting the governor of the Lamerd region, Ali Alizadeh, as saying a sports hall, 2 residential areas, and a hall near a school were hit. Flights across the Middle East were disrupted and air defense fire thudded over Dubai, the United Arab Emirates commercial capital. Shrapnel from an Iranian missile attack on the UAE capital killed 1 person, state media said. Israel said the operation had been planned for months with the United States. Air Force pilots struck hundreds of targets across Iran, Israeli military chief of staff Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir said in a statement. Targets in the Israeli campaign included Iran's military, symbols of government, and intelligence targets, according to an official briefed on the operation, who spoke on condition of anonymity to discuss non-public information on the attack. Trump acknowledged Saturday that there could be American casualties, saying, "That often happens in war." He said he was aiming to annihilate the Iranian Navy and destroy regional proxies supported by Tehran. He called on paramilitary Iranian Revolutionary Guard to lay down arms, saying members would be given immunity or face certain death if they did not. In a video posted to social media, Trump also addressed the Iranian people, saying, "The hour of your freedom is at hand. Stay sheltered. Don't leave your home. It's very dangerous outside. Bombs will be dropping everywhere. When we are finished, take over your government. It will be yours to take. This will probably be your only chance for generations." Before the strikes, Iran had said it had hoped to avert a war, but it maintained its right to enrich uranium. Iran had said it had not enriched since June, but it has blocked international inspectors from visiting the sites the U.S. bombed. Satellite photos analyzed by AP have shown new activity at 2 of those sites, suggesting Iran is trying to assess and potentially recover material. Trump had threatened military action but held off following Iran's recent crackdown on protests, spurred by economic grievances that evolved into nationwide push against the ruling clerics. The human rights activist news agency says it confirmed more than 7,000 deaths in the crackdown and is investigating thousands more. The government has acknowledged more than 3,000 killed. The strikes could rattle global markets, particularly if Iran makes the Strait of Hormuz unsafe for commercial traffic. A third of worldwide oil exports transported by sea passed through the strait in 2025. Saudi Arabia said Iran targeted its capital and eastern region in an attack that was repelled. Bahrain said a missile attack targeted the U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet headquarters in the island kingdom, and 3 buildings were damaged in the capital, Manama, and Murahak City by drone strikes and debris from an intercepted missile. Kuwait's Civil Aviation Authority said a drone targeted the main international airport, injuring several employees. Kuwait's state-run news agency said 3 troops were injured by shrapnel from strikes that hit Ali Al Salem Air Base. Explosions could also be heard in Qatar. Jordan said it dealt with 49 drones and ballistic missiles. This from the Associated Press. Continuing on with the same theme, Prime Minister voices support for operation. Tehran bears responsibility to de-escalate conflict with U.S., Carney says, by Alex Ballingwall, Deputy Ottawa Bureau Chief, Mumbai. In the wake of U.S. President Donald Trump's major new attack on Iran, Prime Minister Mark Carney said Canada supports the wave of deadly airstrikes and placed responsibility for de-escalating the conflict squarely on the regime in Tehran. Taking questions from an Indian broadcast journalist at a hotel in the country's financial capital on Saturday, Carney said his government does not expect to take part in the military operation that broke out on Saturday when the United States and Israel launched their assault. Carney said Canadian officials had discussed the possibility of a new war erupting in recent weeks as the U.S. moved a Navy arsenal into the Middle East and pressured Iran to give up its uranium enrichment program. He called for the protection of all civilians, but he did not echo reactions from leaders in Europe who urged both sides to restrain themselves as Trump called for regime change amid a major combat operation against Iran. It is a serious escalation, Carney said. In a serious conflict, you have to make choices. Condemning Iran's Islamic regime, Carney said Tehran is the principal source of instability and terror in the region and charged that the country has failed to dismantle its nuclear program or stop supporting terrorist proxy groups in the Middle East. Carney added that the consequence of that behavior will now be decided by whether Iran de-escalates the conflict. The threat of what has now been realized in terms of military action should have been clear to an Iranian regime which has refused to dismantle fully its nuclear program and continues to pose a serious threat to the region, Carney said. Canada supports the United States' acting to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon and to prevent its regime from further threatening international peace and security, affirming also that Canada supports Israel's right to defend itself against threats from Iran. Saturday's violence is the latest flashpoint in a turbulent and deadly series of events for Iran. Last year, the U.S. dropped so-called bunker buster bombs on the country in an attempt to destroy underground facilities where Tehran was suspected to be developing nuclear weapons. Amid heavy sanctions from Western countries, prices soared in Iran, sparking mass protests against the regime in late December. The Iranian government responded in a crackdown that reportedly killed thousands. Reza Pahlavi, the son of the last Shah of Iran, who was deposed in the 1979 revolution, has positioned himself as a possible successor to power in Tehran. On Saturday, he described the new attacks on Iran as a humanitarian intervention and called on the Iranian people to reclaim and rebuild their country. The scale of the current attacks appeared broad, with Trump promising to, quote, raze Iran's missile industry to the ground and to annihilate their navy. Israeli officials told the Associated Press that Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, had been killed in the airstrikes. Trump, when asked about reports that Khamenei was killed, said, "We feel that that is a correct story." Trump later posted on Truth Social that Khamenei is dead, saying his passing is the single greatest chance for the Iranian people to take back their country. Iran's Red Crescent humanitarian organization said Saturday night the Israeli-U.S. strikes across Iran had killed 201 people and injured 747, with dozens at a girls' school reported dead, according to comments on Iranian state TV. Iran quickly retaliated with strikes of its own, with the country's Revolutionary Guard saying it was aiming for U.S. military bases in Bahrain, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates, as well as military targets in Israel. The country's National Security Council said in a statement that this was the start of a decisive response to these hostile acts by the U.S. and Israel. Our objective is to defend the American people by eliminating imminent threats from the Iranian regime, Trump said, blaming the Islamic Revolutionary Government installed in 1979 for supporting terrorist groups and menacing other countries for decades. He called on Iranians to seize the chance to topple the Islamic regime. Don't leave your home. It's very dangerous outside. Bombs will be dropping everywhere. When we are finished, take over your government. This will probably be your only chance for generations. Leaders from the European Union, meanwhile, urged maximum restraint from all sides to avoid further escalation of the erupting conflict. Some went further, with Norway's foreign minister reportedly describing Saturday's initial strikes on Iran by Israel as a breach of international law. Carney, however, said Canada's support for U.S. attacks is consistent with the government's opposition to the Iranian regime, which he condemned for having one of the world's worst human rights records. He noted that Canada has long called on Iran to end its nuclear program and listed the country's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, a powerful branch of the Iranian military, as a terrorist entity in 2024. In a statement online, conservative leader Pierre Poilievre echoed Carney in describing Iran as the prime source of terrorism in the Middle East and pointed to the downing by missile of Flight PS-752 from Tehran in 2020 that killed 176 people, including 55 Canadian citizens and 30 permanent residents. Conservatives support a democratic, free, and permanent denuclearized Iran that lives in peace and security with its neighbors. And conservatives support the United States, Israel, and our allies across the Gulf to defend their sovereignty and dismantle the clerical military dictatorship of Iran, Poilievre said. Speaking shortly before the attacks on Saturday, Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand told reporters in Mumbai that Canada's priority is to find a negotiated solution to the tensions over Iran's nuclear program. In recent discussions with U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio and others, Anand said she voiced Canada's position that it wants to avoid a conflict. On Saturday evening, Anand said on social media that she's spoken with her G7 counterparts and has been in touch with foreign ministers in the Middle East about the evolving hostilities. Canada stands with the Iranian people, Anand says, adding, "We will continue to provide all possible support to Canadians throughout the region and urge Canadians in Iran to shelter in place." You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And a final article to go along with this theme, that is, why is Carney supporting Trump's war? Opinion, Justin Ling. In Iran, Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu have opted to play regime change roulette. They are wagering with the lives of civilians in Iran, Israel, and the Gulf countries. They risk embroiling American and Israeli forces into yet another forever war, a military operation with no clear objectives and no way to truly win. And they do so with no clear plan, purpose, or objective. This gamble may yet pay off. These strikes could paralyze the Iranian state enough that the people may seize power from Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, as Trump has called them to do. But that doesn't make the risks of this immoral gamble any less dangerous. Nevertheless, the warmongers have found a fan in Prime Minister Mark Carney. Saturday morning, Carney released a statement announcing that he supports the United States in its strikes on Iran. It is a feckless, bewildering, totally unnecessary position. It should call into question the Prime Minister's supposed belief in the prohibition of the use of force, except when consistent with the UN Charter, as he told the World Economic Forum in Davos early this year. Carney's statement does not even make a boilerplate call for de-escalation. Instead, it cheerleads America, acting to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon and to prevent its regime from further threatening international peace and security. That is painfully naive and obsequious statement, which blindly accepts an entirely unconvincing casus belli. The rest of the liberal world has managed to thread this needle. A joint statement from the United Kingdom, France, and Germany did not endorse Trump's war, while other European leaders urged de-escalation. Spain's prime minister went so far as to say he rejects the unilateral military action of the United States and Israel. Iran has spent decades chasing a nuclear weapon, yes. The threat of this program is why Israel and America launched waves of strikes last year, strikes which apparently obliterated Iran's nuclear program, at least according to the White House. Any suggestion to the contrary was, quote, fake news, the administration said. The risk of Iran rebooting that program is why America has been trying to push Tehran into accepting a new disarmament deal. Oman, which had been mediating the talks, said Thursday there had been significant progress on a deal. But America isn't even trying to pretend that there is a nuclear program left to destroy. Earlier this week, Secretary of State Marco Rubio told reporters that, given the opportunity, Iran will return to enrichment one day. They are lying to justify war, and they are risking international peace and security in doing so. Israel's public broadcaster Khan reported Saturday that Trump and Netanyahu had settled on the plan for this war during their meeting in Washington on February 11th, and that these recent weeks of negotiations were a mere deception exercise. Why? Well, with Trump, every past accusation has turned into a modern admission, In 2011, he tweeted that, quote, in order to get elected, Barack Obama will start a war with Iran. With midterms looming on the horizon, we should recognize this war as a Trumpian effort to improve his own political fortunes. Both Trump and Netanyahu have chaos at home, and they are desperate to distract from. Trump has never been so unpopular. The Epstein files he tried to keep secret have implicated members of his own cabinet. His tariffs are driving prices up and put him on a legal collision course with the Supreme Court, and he is months away from midterm elections that he has thus far failed to rig. Israel is also heading to elections this fall, and polls from earlier this month suggest Netanyahu could lose that vote. What's more, settler violence has again engulfed the West Bank as Netanyahu's government openly muses about seizing more land from Palestine. In the past, his wars have generally improved his standing at home. That this invasion is morally bankrupt and intolerably risky doesn't change the fact that the Iranian regime is brutal and illegitimate. The Iranian people are sick of the theocratic regime, and they have died trying to oust it. Tehran says it killed 3,000 protesters in recent months, but independent assessments put that figure as high as 30,000. Despite extolling people to take to the streets, it does not seem Trump's operation has done much to weaken the tools of state coercion, which have put down unrest. The Iranian state has warned its citizens to remain indoors, and state forces were quickly deployed to patrol the streets and quell any attempts to instigate revolution. The Pentagon itself told Trump this. Both the Wall Street Journal and Axios have reported in recent days that General Dan Kane, chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, warned Trump that attacking Iran risked overtaxing the American military, depleting its reserves of air defense and munitions, sucking America into another protracted conflict, and that it might not work. Quoting a source, Axios reported that the general, who is close to Trump, is a reluctant warrior on Iran. While it is far too soon to know the full consequence of this war, initial reports suggest that America and Israel failed to attain their main operational aims. The airstrikes may have killed the 86-year-old Khamenei, but they did little to hinder Iran's ability to launch waves of attacks against Israel, Jordan, and the metropolises on the Arabian Peninsula. The scale of Iran's response far exceeds what they unleashed last year. Worse yet, America has no plan for a post-Ayatollah Iran, and these strikes risk solidifying the regime's hold on power, as they have in the past. It is good news that Khamenei, who was a butcher of his own people, is dead, but let's not pretend that war on Iran was done to help the Iranian people any more than Trump's operation in Venezuela, which removed Nicolas Maduro but kept his corrupt and violent government in place, was done in the name of democracy. Trump wrote on Truth Social Saturday afternoon that after the bombing will continue as long as necessary to achieve our objective of peace throughout the Middle East and indeed the world. And that was all in caps. And we should not ignore the lives of Americans took while pursuing this brazen, unnecessary war. This morning, airstrikes hit a school in southern Iran, killing at least 80, according to Iranian state media. Photos show a pink backpack leaning on the rubble of a school splattered in blood. We should cheer when the brutal Iranian regime falls, whenever that may come to pass, but we should condemn this chaotic, risky violence and all the death that comes with it. Turning now to the city itself, should Toronto hire emergency shovelers? New York City is paying people $30 per hour to clear sidewalks. Kevin Jiang, staff reporter. After a record-breaking snowstorm last month left some Toronto sidewalks buried under snow and ice for weeks, some residents started scrambling for better snow clearing solutions. So when the news broke out that New York City had begun paying residents $30 an hour to dig out buried sidewalks and bus stops, some Torontonians started calling on their city to do the same. For its part, the city of Toronto is not currently considering paying residents for short-term or on-call snow clearing duties, a spokesperson told The Star. Here's how NYC handles snow and whether Toronto could learn a thing or two. NYC has been paying residents to shovel snow for decades now. Vincent Gragnani, press secretary for the NYC Department of Sanitation, told The Star. After a heavy snowfall, the fleet of civilian shovelers moves out to tackle public areas like bus stops, crosswalks, fire hydrants, and stairways. Areas snowplows and other machinery may find difficult to navigate. Every fall, we put the word out through the media and social media, encouraging New Yorkers to sign up online as emergency snow shovelers. Then, after heavy winter storms, we activate these shovelers and ask them to report their local sanitation garages, Gragnani explained over email. Gragnani wouldn't share how much the program cost, citing difficulties in isolating the price as the program is intertwined with a lot of other ongoing operations. The gig usually pays $19.14 an hour in US dollars, increased to $28.71 an hour after the first 40 hours worked in a week. But the city recently upped its starting pay to $30 an hour, rising to $45 an hour after the first 40 hours worked in a week, due to blizzard conditions in the current winter storm, according to the city's website. After raising the wage and streamlining the sign-up process, Gragnani said 1,400 people signed up on Tuesday alone. NYC's program sounds impressive, but in reality, a New York City solution may not be a Toronto solution. These are very different environments, noted Joe Mehek, a former Toronto City Councilor and current professor of urban studies at York University. NYC needs this program because it doesn't get as much snowfall as we do, and thus does not have as robust a snow clearing operation in place, Mehek says. NYC averages around 76 centimeters of snowfall a year, dwarfed by Toronto's 122 centimeter annual average. We already have city staff and dedicated machinery clearing out sidewalks and bus stops, Mehek continued. He believes it's not worth raising taxes and instating a new program on the off chance another record-breaking storm rolls around. We already have a system, and ours is more mechanized, which is in the end cheaper. Dylan Reed, co-founder of pedestrian advocacy group Walk Toronto, agrees that Toronto has the snow clearing capacity to handle most winters. But we don't have the capacity to handle extraordinary events, and clearly the city's mechanical plows are not sufficient. For example, Toronto's sidewalk plows struggle to clear snow deeper than 15 centimeters, leading to nearly half of the city-owned sidewalk plows to break down during the fierce snowstorms last February. That's why it took them a long time to clear even the essential passageways after the January 25th storm dropped nearly 50 centimeters of snow within 24 hours, Reed said. A lot of residential streets were only cleared because people shoveled themselves. The machines also struggled to work around obstructions like poles or fire hydrants. Having a fleet of manual shovelers that could prioritize these locations during times of extraordinary snowfall could be of great help, said Reed. That's easy enough to say, but it's harder to implement in practice, said George Armstrong, a snowplow operator and general manager of Monster Plowing Company in Toronto. The first thing I'm concerned about is the safety for everybody involved, Armstrong said. It's not a job for untrained people off the street. It takes a lot of time and mentorship to be able to complete this work on a commercial level. Snow shovelers need training and equipment. It's a very physically demanding job, and you're dealing with very cold weather and extended periods of being outside, he added. Armstrong questions whether the city has the capacity to tackle such a logistical undertaking when it's already busy coordinating the overall snow clearing response. There would have to be intensive training, the health and safety considerations of staff. They would need to be actively supervised, he said. It's just a lot more signing people up on the website and sending them out into the cold. Ontario needs aging plan, experts say. The number of residents over 80 is about to surge, but province only offers piecemeal programs. Maura Welsh, Queen's Park Bureau. Ontario's oldest of the old, those who have passed their 80th birthday, will surge in numbers over the next 15 years. But Premier Doug Ford's approach to this massive demographic shift is stuck in the past, advocates say. Multiple ministries offer piecemeal programs, but the expectation of more than 1.5 million Ontarians occupying the octogenarian plus cohort by 2041 means the province needs a master plan for growing old, said Lauren Tambit-Watts, CEO of CanAge, a national advocacy organization. With global aging defined by the World Health Organization and the United Nations as a megatrend equal to artificial intelligence and climate emergencies, Tamblyn-Watts is among the leaders calling on Ford to create an aging secretariat or a ministry of longevity with a plan to support a population that can statistically expect many extra decades of life. This is not a call for prevention, it's a call for planning, she said. We are tired of crisis. We are tired of crisis funding. California, New York State, and Massachusetts have shattered traditional government silos by mandating that an age filter be applied across government departments. Ontario, while offering some innovative programs, appears wedded to the status quo. Our government is taking action and making a record investments to connect people of all ages to the care and support they need close to home or in the comfort of their own home, said a statement from the Premier's office. Noting Ontario's new pilot project for emotional-based models of care in nursing homes, The ministry also cited a paramedicine program that has helped 85,000 seniors age safely in their homes for longer, and a $2.1 billion plan to expand primary care through the work of medical professionals in every corner of the province. I want to pause for a moment just to remind you that you are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Returning to the article. The demographic shift, already well underway, led to a 2019 executive order signed by California Governor Gavin Newsom to create a master plan for aging. In a 5-year follow-up report, Newsom said it has led to similar programs in dozens of other states. As long expected, Ontario attained super-aged status this year. The number of people living in Ontario aged 65 or older will grow from 2.6 million in 2020 to 4.2 million in 2040, an expansion of over 60%, said a 2024 report by the Dalla Lana School of Public Health. Centenarians are a smaller but fast-growing population. The massive cohort of millennials will soon reach the so-called younger older phase of life, with the eldest turning 50 in 5 years. Aging master plans don't stop with healthcare. They consider policies on housing, caregiving, isolation, economics, and the extreme personal cost of a long life, which can be debilitating for older women who live longer and often have limited pensions or savings. A 2024 report on the megatrend of aging by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development concluded that among its members' countries, older women are more likely to be poor, 17%, than men, 11%. Aging, OECD concluded, will be a major challenge for social protection systems. Ontario is supporting innovation, including a Hamilton land swap that turned an empty nursing home into supportive housing after residents moved into a new facility, said Donna Duncan, CEO of the Ontario Long-Term Care Association. But Duncan added, new projects do not negate the need for an aging secretariat or an appointee mandated by the Premier to bring the lens of longevity to government decisions. In Ontario, an aging plan could examine gaps in transit routes or the need for better home care in rural communities. Or, Duncan said, it could prepare in advance for projected illnesses such as those highlighted in the Dalla Lana report, which predicts more than half of Ontarians aged 65 and older will live with a major illness by 2040. That's, again, predicts more than half of Ontarians aged 65 and older will live with a major illness. Duncan's association represents nursing home operators, but with new builds and other community-related programs added to the homes, she now meets with municipal governments or the ministries of health, social services and transportation, housing, education, and infrastructure. It's not just the long-term care ministry anymore, she said. Lisa Levine, CEO of Advantage Ontario, which represents supportive housing and not-for-profit nursing home operators, said the complications of managing decisions from numerous ministries means groups trying to build housing that helps people remain in their communities have to navigate a bureaucratic labyrinth. During submissions ahead of Finance Minister Peter Bethlenfalvy's spring budget, Levin's report called for a system-wide view for seniors care that focuses on upstream solutions. While she is not seeking an office devoted to aging, Levin's report, presented to the Standing Committee on Finance and Economic Affairs, calls for a new playbook to diminish hospital stays or emergency long care placements. Build capacity where it prevents crises, not only where it receives them. Do it in a practical, affordable way that will relieve pressure on the entire system, the report said. Part of the answer, Levine said, is updating existing affordable housing stock, which is often run down, and adding built-in home care or social supports. This can be done really simply, she said, and have a very, very strong impact. Why one of Toronto's oldest Japanese restaurants is calling it quits. Karen Liu, food reporter. Whenever I'm having an imaginary solo power lunch at Nami Japanese restaurant, the long-standing sushi and robata bar in Old Town, I half expect the scene from Die Hard or American Psycho to unfold in its windowless dining room, perpetually set in twilight. In contrast to today's minimalist omakase restaurants with pale wood counters and bright overhead lighting, Nami has always leaned into mood and mystery. Since opening in the early 1980s, it has offered little rooms to duck into for a secret rendezvous or discreet deal. An imposing set of samurai armor guards the entrance. A grand tatami room in the back sits behind paper screens, backlit so diners can make out the silhouettes inside. The room speaks to a time of suits, entertaining clients with bottomless expense accounts and bottles of sake, as well as celebrities ducking in to avoid being seen. As that era fades, so too does Nami. Its second generation owner, Jennifer Yu, announced that after more than 40 years, the restaurant at 55 Adelaide Street East will be having its last day on March 7th. This was the buzziest place in the 80s, Yu said over a quiet lunch in one of the booths. U2 was here. Whitney Houston came here. But we didn't take photos because we had to maintain a private place. When I was in grade 9, Mom called from the restaurant to say that Rolling Hills were here. It was actually the Rolling Stones. Yu said a perfect storm of factors led to the closure. Rent went up. Customer traffic never returned to pre-pandemic levels as hybrid work became the norm and people cut back on dining out. We used to be able to do 2 or 3 seatings at lunch and dinner, said Yu. Food and labor costs have also gone up. Stricter immigration policies have also made it harder to recruit and retain talent from Japan. Some chefs who were able to work at Nami waited up to 7 years for permanent residency. Japanese restaurateurs in Toronto have faced a particularly difficult time keeping chefs in the country as federal immigration streams in recent years prioritized applicants in sectors such as healthcare and the sciences. They have the skill set. They want to be here and stay, but we lost 5 chefs in the last year and a half, Yu said. We survived SARS and COVID, but that's the thing that's putting the nail to all of this. Nami's origin story is somewhat hazy. Yu's father, Ken, is now in his 80s, and his former business partner, Fred Kumoy, is dead. Going through old documents, Yu said the restaurant was incorporated in 1984. Its longtime Rabata chief, Abraham Lodin, known as Mohasan, recalls starting work there around 1982. The late Japanese-Canadian architect Raymond Moriyama was once slated to be a third partner in the business, although that never materialized. He did, however, design Nami's interior, which remains largely unchanged to this day. The restaurant now joins a list of Moriyama-designed spaces in the city facing uncertain futures, including the Ontario Science Centre, the Japanese-Canadian Cultural Centre, and the Go-On Bell Shelter at the overhauled Ontario Place. When Nami opened, it was one of only a handful of Japanese restaurants in Toronto. Without the internet to scout the competition, Yu said her father would send her and her friends to eat at places such as Imatai on St. Patrick's Street, which opened in 1989 and later became Muni Robata in 2020. At the time, it was one of the few places serving home-style dishes like natto, along with full omakase experiences before diners moved beyond spicy salmon rolls. Although its origins are still contested, Nami claims to be the birthplace of Toronto's new, now ubiquitous, sushi pizza, a dish mentioned in a 1993 Toronto Star food column. Chef Kaoru Osada, who worked at Nami from 1987 to 1996, previously told the Star he got the idea after trying a rosti topped with smoked salmon. He combined that concept with leftover sushi rice as a way to reduce food waste. Yu said the restaurant uses a special machine that presses the rice into a uniform shape and removes air bubbles, producing a better patty. The sushi pizza was reviled at first, said Yu. Food critics hated it and said it was too expensive. But it was delicious. It's basically a hash brown and crispy. And now people visiting Toronto consider a sushi pizza as part of the Canadian experience. In a social media post announcing the closure, she also encouraged people to share their memories of the restaurant. There were so many good memories, said Yu, adding that she lost track of the number of times she was asked to hide engagement rings in the sushi boats she'd bring to couples' tables over the years. She also remembers her dad helping staff outside of work. I'll never forget a staff member from Japan. He was only 20 and his appendix burst, so my dad brought him food to the hospital. To keep the legacy of Nami going, as well as keeping as much of the current staff employed, Yu is asking customers through social media if they would be interested in Nami continuing to exist as a small catering operation. She is also looking into selling merch of the restaurant, as well as reproducing the sushi pizza press the restaurant uses. If we could have made a modest profit, we would have stayed, Yu said, but we can't. Moving to an opinion section here. Big tech, government, are trying to sell us on AI. Elizabeth Renzetti, contributing columnist. Have you ever been hustled by a salesperson? Buy now or you'll lose out, you big loser. Only to arrive home wondering what it is exactly that you bought? It feels like we're at that moment, not because of a blender that's too big for the counter, but rather because we're being sold technology that is upending our lives. Perhaps you also feel this agitation as the tools of artificial intelligence creep without invitation into your life while you wonder, like the guys in the Talking Heads song, how did I get here? You're certainly not alone. Look at the people who oppose new resource-sucking data centers in their communities, the artists fighting to protect their creativity and livelihoods, the researchers studying amplified bias, the market watchers shouting about AI bubbles. The federal government is definitely the sweaty-browed salesperson in this scenario. It has championed a bold strategy for Canada's AI framework, a sprint toward imagining future prosperity. What that looks like in the short run? Artificial Intelligence Minister Evan Solomon failing to take meaningful action when X's chatbot Grok was undressing women and girls online, and failing to hold OpenAI accountable when the company admitted it knew of alarming activity on the ChatGPT account of the mass killer in Tumbler Ridge, British Columbia. Solomon called OpenAI executives in for a meeting, but they left not with a slap on the wrist and barely even a gentle tickle. If you wanted to have a say in the government's AI strategy, you're out of luck. Maybe you missed the month-long period in October in which the public's opinion was solicited alongside a task force composed of academics, NGOs, and a lot of tech industry insiders. It was a busy month. The Blue Jays were on a roll. There were skeletons to hang on the door. In what world is 30 days enough for all Canadians to have a say about a transformative technology? But there is a place where Canadians can express their hopes and anxieties. It's called the People's Consultation on AI, created to protest and reject the deeply misguided and wrong-headed approach to public consultation demonstrated by the government's 30-day national sprint. Consultation, endorsed by more than 160 academics, unions, tech groups, and human rights organizations, is open to input from the public until March 15th. After that, submissions will be posted on the site for everyone to read and presented to politicians in Ottawa. And no, the results will not be analyzed by AI. The People's Consultation is intended not just to counter the haste of the government's consultation process, but also the makeup of the AI task force, which critics say is too heavily weighted toward the tech and AI industry and not representative of those who have concerns about AI's environmental consequences and potential for labor upheaval. The BC Civil Liberties Association is one of the groups endorsing the People's Consultation, and I talked to its policy staff counsel, Aislinn Jackson, about why public input is so vital. We need to listen to people who have real concerns and take them seriously, because we can't put this toothpaste back in the tube once these technologies are widespread and people have integrated them into their workflows, Jackson said. It will be very hard to claw back privacy and human rights and any sort of expectations we might have about how we want to be governed and how we want these technologies to serve us rather than the other way around. Will Ottawa heed the results of the People's Consultation? I have my doubts. The government has quietly released a summary analyzing using AI tools of the input it received from its own short consultation, and I highly recommend reading it. More than 11,000 respondents provided submission through an online portal, and the task force produced 32 reports. The online submissions are particularly interesting. In short, people want guardrails. Respondents warned of environmental harm, privacy risks, and job displacement, urging Canada to adopt a cautious, evidence-based approach. They called for ethical guidelines, regulatory clarity, and sector-specific standards to ensure AI improves efficiency without undermining human judgment. Just because Ottawa calls this a sprint doesn't mean the race is over. There's still time to make your voice heard. Elizabeth Renzetti is a Toronto-based contributing columnist for The Star and author of What She Said, Conversations About Equality. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on the Niagara Frontier radio reading service. A Freudian reading of Carney's Davos speech. Ellen Grach, contributor. When Mark Carney observed in Davos in January that the world order had ruptured, his words struck the globe like thunder on a sunny day. Yet, sunny it has not been for a while, and the Canadian Prime Minister's vision should have been evident to anyone paying attention. But the West and its allies have been clinging to the world of yesterday, with denial of all that is lost, barely warding off the despair over what is to come. In Freudian terms, they were stuck in mourning and unable to envision a different, let alone a better future. In 1915, a year into the First World War, Freud published a 3-page essay about this very thing. Mourning, he observed, is the process of detaching from the lost love object so that we are eventually free to attach to a new one. As the war dragged on with vast losses of life, property, art, and civilization itself mounting, it was hard for people to grasp the ephemeral nature of a bygone world. In their mind, it was therefore gone forever, which made it all but impossible to imagine that the war, too, would end and civilization would be restored. Today, a year into the second Trump administration, trending geopolitical and economic conditions are eerily reminiscent of those days before the First, as well as the Second World War. The group psychology across much of the United States and in many of its traditional ally states mirrors Freud's observations well into that war. Given the scope and pace of the shifting American agenda, both domestic and international, many now cling to the lost and idealized version of post-Second World War America, while at the same time being unable to imagine its restoration or the birth of a new, even better world order. Will Americans ever trust their government again? Hard to imagine. Will the world ever trust America again? Hard to imagine. Enter Mark Carney. In confronting the rupture, he articulated a geopolitical way forward, at least for the non-hegemonic middle powers. In so doing, he pierced through both the denial and despair embedded in the mourning process. His words resonated like a therapist encouraging us to face reality and plan for the next chapter. In his essay, Freud recalled a poignant conversation he had with the melancholy poet Rainer Maria Rilke. It took place on a beautiful nature walk in the Italian Dolomites prior to the war. Mourning the transience of all natural phenomena, Rilke was unable to enjoy the surroundings. Freud countered that it was precisely that transience that gave all things their value. This, Freud concluded, applies equally to all that the war has ravaged. When once the mourning is over, it will be found that our high opinion of the reaches of civilization has lost nothing from our discovery of their fragility. We shall build up again all that war has destroyed, and perhaps on firmer ground and more. Hard as it was to imagine at the time, Freud's optimism was borne out, certainly in the aftermath of the Second World War. In Freud's universe of human duality, this was the triumph of Eros over Thanatos. Like much of his other work, his message still resonates, giving us hope that in the coming years the forces of love and life will once again overcome those of destruction and death. But as Mark Carney would have it, for this to materialize, one must first see the world as it is, not through the lens of the ideal or idealized past. Taking out El Mencho risks more violence ahead. Power vacuum might spur battling cartels to deal out more deaths. Maya Averbuch and Andrea Navarro. The killing last weekend of El Mencho, one of Mexico's most wanted drug lords, risks being both a blessing and a curse for President Claudia Sheinbaum. It was a political win both at home and abroad, and the clearest sign yet that she has stepped out of her predecessor's shadow with a major assault on one of the most heavily armed drug trafficking organizations in the nation. But as videos of the ensuing car burnings and highway blockades showed, it could also lead to a further destabilization of the country's already fragile security. Though great for official photo ops and fodder for Hollywood scripts, experts say that ridding an illicit group of its leader doesn't necessarily curb its grip on the nation. Instead, it risks creating power vacuums that inevitably lead to more violence. Others worry that the chaos or the chase distracts from the problems of disappearances and homicides that the country of roughly 130 million copes with each day. The kingpin strategy nets short-term gains, said Gladys McCormick, a security expert at Syracuse University. It's very effective at getting a dopamine hit, of we're doing something against cartels, but as soon as next week, we could see a splintering effect that comes into play. Sheinbaum is straying from the precepts of the former president, Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, whose popularity helped bring her to power after she was Mexico City's mayor. His passive strategy allowed the cartels that Mexican governments have long reckoned with, and sometimes illicitly become involved with, to increase their control over large swaths of the country. They also diversified their businesses well beyond drugs and deeper into fuel theft, extortion, and mining. The Jalisco New Generation cartel is very much emblematic of that trend. It has become more visibly powerful in recent years, flaunting heavily armored cars and employing drone attacks. Its franchise model allowed for its quick expansion to over 40 countries across the globe, according to the U.S. Some researchers estimate criminal groups are now among Mexico's main employers. This was the last nail in the coffin of the hugs not bullets strategy, McCormick said, referring to Lopez Obrador's strategy of tending to the root causes of criminal activity and cartels' ability to recruit young people. On top of the looming threat of further violence, Sheinbaum still has to contend with President Donald Trump, who has time and time again offered U.S. military might to help Mexico to take a more decisive approach to criminal organizations. Even after initial praise for the operation to take out El Mencho on Sunday, Sheinbaum's northern counterpart said Mexico needed to step up. The U.S. is going to keep making demands, but there has to be a different strategy, said Catalina Perez Correa, a drug policy researcher in Mexico City. They detain the leaders, but that doesn't change the conditions that create the financial gains for criminal organization. Cutting off their source of funds is key to seeing real results, she said. The growth of the Jalisco New Generation cartel is very much a story of how Mexico's criminal groups armed up and proliferated in the face of an ineffective and violent two-decade military crackdown. Oseguera, who was deported from the U.S. after serving time on drug charges in the 1990s, founded the Jalisco cartel around 15 years ago when a power vacuum emerged after the leader of another Mexican cartel was killed. CJNG, the Spanish acronym it's known by, turned into a major supplier of fentanyl, meth, and cocaine to U.S. markets. The U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration said a small group of top commanders reported directly to Oseguera, who used the billions in profits to help increase the cartel's global footprint and took control of major Pacific Coast ports. CJNG swiftly and violently became one of the most powerful transnational criminal organizations in Mexico and the world, according to a report led by the National Consortium for the Study of Terrorism and Responses to Terrorism. CJNG is an organization that is organized criminal security threat unlike other experienced before, the report said. In 2015, the cartel shot down a military helicopter that was part of an operation to try to capture El Mencho. In 2020, the group killed Jalisco's former governor while out to dinner and killed 13 policemen in an ambush in 2019. Last year, the discovery of human remains at a Jalisco ranch used by CJNG led to an outcry about the government turning a blind eye. Sheinbaum has promised that she's taking a multi-pronged approach to security and touted the arrest of a mayor from her own party earlier this year as a sign nobody would be spared. Those who say it's risky to remove a cartel leader, especially one of Oseguera's stature, point to what happened to Sinaloa State as proof that ramifications can take months, if not years, to be resolved. The detention of Ishmael El Mayo Zambada, a leader of the faction of the Sinaloa cartel in 2024, unleashed a deadly cartel war that has left over 2,400 dead and has aggressively upended the daily life of 1 million residents and businesses across the eponymous western state. The violence, which last month included the kidnapping of 10 workers from a Canadian-run mine, has been a focal point of Mexico's security forces under the Sheinbaum's government after it took power the year the Sinaloa cartel infighting broke out. Authorities later identified 5 of their bodies. Last Sunday, CJNG immediately made their grievances with the Oseguera's death known nationally. Local media reported road blockages, attacks against businesses, or burnt vehicles in 22 states, a show of the cartel's might and geographic reach. Jalisco is more loosely structured the further you go down the chain of command than Sinaloa, and they have a much more diversified portfolio, said McCormick. The immediate reaction in some part of the country was a sign of that power, she said, pointing to the states of Michoacán, Veracruz, Colima, and Guanajuato as places that could see a greater cartel violence. Latin America has watched in recent months as the U.S. killed over 100 people on boats allegedly carrying drugs. A U.S. military operation in Venezuela in January ended with the capture of President Nicolas Maduro, who is now facing charges of abetting the drug trade. And so governments in the region are feeling the pressure, in part because of the U.S., and in part because crime and violence remain among citizens' top concerns. In Colombia, President Gustavo Petro's controversial peace plan with armed groups has allowed for the generation of record amounts of cocaine and a violent start to the country's election season. Even with a few months left in office, he has faced immense pressure from Trump. In Brazil, President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, who is seeking re-election, has tried a strategy of fighting against cartels' financing. A huge raid in Sao Paulo's financial hub last year happened without much fanfare, while a police operation that ended in the killing of more than 100 people in Rio de Janeiro received much popular support. For Mexico, the problem is one both at home and abroad, as Sheinbaum has insisted that her government has seen an over 40% decrease in homicides from the time she took office. Trump has mentioned fentanyl imports into the U.S. and drug overdoses of Americans as a reason to intervene in Latin American affairs since he started his second term. Analysts say it's been a convenient cover for a government that wants a bigger and more aggressive footprint in the region. When a reporter asked whether Mexico was prepared for the fallout from a change in the balance of power in the Jalisco cartel, Security Minister Omar Garcia Harfuch, the face of much of the government's security strategy, said that the government was watching out for any kind of reaction or restructuring within the cartel that could be violent, he said. Defense Minister Ricardo Trevilla said on Monday that Sheinbaum's government more broadly has stepped up the destruction of drug labs and at a more structural level, strengthened the National Guard that complements the traditional military forces and improved its intelligence capacities. Many Mexicans who have seen similar episodes, including during the presidency of Felipe Calderón, are not yet reassured. Osiguera's killing might be reminiscent of the capture of cartel leader Edgar Valdez Villarreal, known as La Barbie, in 2010, or the pursuit of Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. But McCormick says it's quite differently when looked at closely. Garcia Harfuch and Sheinbaum were pushed into pivoting to this strategy, but they're actively focusing on coordinating and collaboration with local authorities, she said. That's a different tenor than Calderon. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the March 1st, 2026 issue of the Toronto Star. Your reader has been Dan. Thank you for listening.